I'm on kind of a mission. I like to travel around the country and talk to people about what it takes to write really good software. I think we've got a real problem here in North America with great software, and I think that we can fix it, but we just got to get people to these meetings to talk about it and to learn about things. So the title of my talk is 12 Questions Wildly Successful Agile Teams Answer Every Day. My day job is I do a couple of things. I'm a CMMI lead appraiser, which means I go around and assess organizations' capabilities. I'm also an Agile appraiser and an Agile evangelist and author. My publisher is here in town, actually. I was meeting with them earlier today. And I'm just about to come out with a new book about how young software developers can grow their careers and be more successful. And that's going to kind of be some of the stuff from today's presentation is actually in that book. So I'm kind of testing it out on you guys, so to speak. So let me know if you think it's terrible. Then I'll go back and change the book. Okay? So anyway, 12 questions of wildly successful Agile teams. So when I was young, when I was a kid, 6, 7 years old, living right here in New York, I was in a band. I grew up in a band, actually, a family band. It wasn't this band. But it was a lot like this band. We didn't have a bus that was multicolored like they did, but we did have a red station wagon that we traveled around in. And we did this all through my childhood. My father had this vision. He was a musician and a music teacher, and he had this vision of creating an incubator for young musicians. And this was his incubator. This was at the band I was actually in. And here's my father and my mother and my siblings, and that's me right down there holding that banjo. And my father had this idea that he was going to build an incubator for young musicians. And the idea was that as soon as his children were born, they started taking music lessons at a very young age, and each child learned 3 instruments. And the instrument configuration was designed so that he could have a jazz band, a folk band, and a rock band. And so my brother played guitar, banjo, and drum set, and I played bass, piano, and guitar. So we could switch off and play different styles of music. And he put us through a very rigorous training regime. He used to get us up at 5 o'clock in the morning and monitor our practice every single day, all through my childhood. And he wanted to prepare us for a career in music by embracing these techniques that musicians had been using for 500 years in order to grow their capabilities. So going all the way back to the beginning of Western music, Johann Sebastian Bach invented methods for practicing and learning that are still used today by great musicians. And he instilled those values in us so that he could put a system together to teach us about music, and also so we could tour the world for free. And we did. We went to China and back then the Soviet Union and South America. We were the first American folk music group to go to the Soviet Union back in the early 70s. And we toured all over the place. That was me when I was 8, by the way. We toured all over the place. As a matter of fact, it was so common that when I was 8 or 9 years old, I thought everybody did that. And I used to say to my friends, where are you guys touring to this summer? And they would look at me like I was the crazy one, right? Well, they were stuck here in Manhattan. In July, I was in Alaska or South America or Japan doing some kind of cool tour. So that was my childhood, and my father building this. And now I did it for a long time in the rest of my life. As a matter of fact, I'm in my 3rd career now. So until I was in my mid-30s, I did this for a living. I traveled all over. I was in Switzerland, and some of these are overseas in different places. And even today, I still do it. So I still do this music thing today. And I apply the exact same techniques to increase my capabilities that my father taught me, even in my 50s today. I do these same exact things. Well, I went to music school, and I learned something about music that I didn't know when I was young, and that was that music has an architecture. It has a language, it has a syntax, it has data constructs and data sets. When I was learning about this, computers weren't a thing. That was back when IBM was saying that who the heck would ever want a computer on their desk, right? So when I was going to school, we didn't know much about computers. Apple was just starting to be born, just a little bit after I was done college. But I went to music school, and I learned about writing music, and I even played in orchestras. This is a little picture of me right here playing in an orchestra in Baltimore back in 1970s sometimes. But I learned that music had a technology architecture to it, that it had logic to it. It had workflow. It had flowcharts. It had go-tos, and it had all kinds of rules and syntactical and languages that are very, very similar to programming languages. And I learned how to write in this language. So this is, if you're not a musician, you may not know what all this code means, but what this means is 15 different musical instruments all playing together in a team, much like a software development team, each playing their own part. So I learned that language. And then in the mid-1980s, I picked up another instrument. Anybody remember these? My father gave me a K-Pro CPM machine with a whopping 4K of internal memory. That's 4,000 bytes for those of you that don't know what 4K is. It's a lot smaller than what we're used to today. I had to learn assembler to write with it because there weren't things like DOS, and BASIC was just starting to get to be a thing with CPM. And so I learned to write code, and I was writing code for music. So I still didn't understand that computers were a thing, but I knew that I could use this thing to make sounds, and that's what I did. I created some early sounds with it. And then somebody came along eventually and said, hey, that thing you do with the computer's sort of cool. Do you think I could use that in my bookstore? I thought about that for a while, and I said, yeah, I bet you if we put all the books on there. So one of the earliest assembler written bookkeeping systems was written on a K-Pro CPM back then, and I worked on that. And I really got interested in it. And one thing I discovered was that the code looks different, but it's exactly the same thing. The data constructs are almost identical. We have go-tos, we have repeats, we have switch statements. If you're a C programmer, you know what a switch statement is. We have if-then-else statements, which is the basic version of a switch statement. We've got all kinds of rules and syntax and data parameters that get passed, and global variables and local variables in the way the key signatures and the timing signatures work. In other words, this code and this code are almost identical. It's great literature in two different languages is all it is. And you can really dissect it. If you take a look at any piece of music, this is a super simple example, but we've got syntax and we've got standards and guidelines, and we have loops and even go-tos, which were big when I was young in programming, but of course we don't technically use those anymore. Conditional logic, if then else, abends, if you remember what abends are from the programming, COBOL programming days. All of the same data constructs exist. Well, I started thinking about how do we increase the capability of software developers if music and software are essentially the same thing? Not just, people say, oh, music is math and software is math, so they're the same. I don't think that's how they're alike. I think they are the same thing. They're not just conceptually the same thing, they're just a different language saying the same thing. We don't worry about increasing capability that much in business today. People get their degrees and then they go work at a company. Very rarely do they get a lot of training. Anybody get a lot more training than they can handle? Anybody get as much training as they think they want? Right, we don't do it. There's a lot of constructs in music that we can learn in the software industry, and that's what I mean about capability. So I'm going to give you a couple of video examples so you can get an idea of the different levels of capability. So how do we take our company from this So that's a low capability musician. You have a level 2 musician. So you can roughly, if you're familiar with CMMI or any other kind of process model, you can kind of get a feel for levels here, what it means. Here's kind of a medium capability violinist. Well, she's a little bit better. She's not going to Carnegie Hall anytime soon, but she keeps practicing. She'll increase her capability. And then we have our friend in Hong Kong. So he's increased his capability in a lot of different ways. Not only is his technical skill better, but he's learned how to connect with his audience better. He's anticipated what they would like to hear. He's leveraged tools in a way that the earlier examples didn't. It's not a question of age, because those examples, those weren't children, they were adults. But he's leveraged his electronic tools in a way, so he's learned as he's gone. He's increased his overall capability in a very dramatic way. You can do this with teams too, by the way. You can look at a team's capability. So here's an example of a team that has low capability. Right, and here's an example of a team that has very high capability. One of the great bands of the 1970s. You can tell by the outfits, by the way. So how do we rock like that? How do we rock our companies so we're like this, right? So we're good like these guys. Well, it turns out there's a formula, and the formula was developed by musicians over 500 years ago. My father taught me this when I was a young musician learning how to play music, and he called them the 12 questions that every great musician needs to answer. And some of them are really obvious things, like who am I trying to be, and what's my goals, what am I trying to achieve, and what do I need. But put together, these 12 questions are a framework for determining how we can be really good at what we do. And a company can adopt this, and an individual can adopt this. The neat thing about this framework, it can apply in almost any setting. So I'm just going to walk through it really quick. So the first question my father used to always ask me every day is who do you want to be? You know, as a musician, who do you want to be? Do you want to be a Yo-Yo Ma character? Do you want to be a David Lee Roth character? His body style was different than mine, so I decided not to be David Lee Roth. But what's your goal? And it turns out that the who am I question can be trifurcated into 3 sub-questions. What do I want to be? What am I shooting for? And how many of us in the business world think about this? What do I want to be? I remember when I first, started moving up in an IT organization, and my CEO asked me one day, he goes, well, what is it you want to be? And I'm not really sure. I really haven't figured that out. Maybe I want to move up, and I made a terrible mistake, by the way. I told him I wanted to be a CIO, and 5 years later, I was CIO of that company, and it was the worst job on the planet. It was terrible. CIO is an awful job. Don't ever do it. It stands for career is over, by the way, just in case you were wondering. What do I want to be? No, it wasn't that bad. It was kind of fun. What do I want to be? What do I really value? And what is expected of me? And so what, do I want to be this guy? Yeah. Mostly because today he looks like this. Or do I want to be? My choice was to be the guy, to be Yo-Yo Ma. That was my style. So the first part of the question is, what I want to be, is all about vision. So what am I trying to accomplish? And vision exists at multiple levels. So if you're trying to determine a strategy for not only your company, but your personal growth, the vision is about who do I want to be at multiple levels. So for a company, I've got corporate strategy, I've got product vision, I've got team vision, and I've got individual vision. And all 4 of those have to trace down and be compatible with one another. I can't say my vision for the company is to control every single thing that happens, but my product vision is to be agile. I can't do that. I can't have those 2 things together. Multiple levels. So my father didn't use these words, but he would say, tell me the story, give me the scenario of what you want to be. And I say, well, I want to be in a great orchestra, I want to play classical music, I want to write music, and I want to perform with really good musicians. He said, okay, that's a great vision. What are you going to do? Well, in order to do that thing, you have to have some values. Values are the single most underrated and most important thing that we ignore in the software development business. Like, what is it that we really value as an organization? This is where the Agile teams really have a lot of great stuff, because the Agile Manifesto is probably one of the great Agile value statements out there, or one of the great value statements. But I valued, technical precision, emotional delivery, and I valued more than anything else wanting to please my audience. And finally, he'd say, well, those things are great. You said who you want to be. You said what your values are. But really, what are you expected to do to get there, right? Well, I said, in order to get there, I'm going to practice 4 hours a day. I'm going to attend performance and listen to other stuff. And I'm going to write down everything I learn. So I have a record of it. So I had my 3 questions answered of who I wanted to be when I grew up. And here's how I was going to get there. So the neat thing about it is today with Agile organizations, we can put a user story together that describes who it is we want to be. So a company might say, well, as a world-class developer of mobile apps, we're going to adapt Agile values and methods so that we can iteratively build the minimum viable product and rapidly deliver to our customers. This isn't a mission statement. This is answering the 3 questions. Because each one of those 3 questions flows down into a whole set of tasks and activities that will actually get us there to the end. Anybody interested in mind mapping? Yeah, mind mapping is really cool. And you know how it works is you say, here's what I want, and then here's all the stuff I got to do to get what I want. And if you've done a lot of mind mapping, you know that the thing that's furthest out to the right or the left is really important. You can't have the thing in the middle if you don't have the thing all the way out to the right and the left. And this is exactly the same idea. I can't be a world-class developer of mobile apps if I don't have a vision of transparency, iteration, fail fast, and if I don't adopt Agile methods. You got to have all those 3 things together because a strong mobile app requires very frequent delivery, very short life cycles. So we can start to build our own mind map for our life, for our career, and for our company. Say we want to have a wildly successful team. Well, the first thing I do is answer the 3 questions or the 3 sub-questions of the first question. The other thing musicians do that's really cool that companies hardly ever do is they hardly ever define their behaviors. And we talk about process a lot. We all talk about process, but process doesn't define behavior. Process defines actions, and it defines outputs, but it doesn't define behaviors. So if I create a process that describes code review, it usually describes an output from a code review, I can really behave any way I want. I can make it a 5-minute meeting. I can invite the wrong people. I can invite people that won't question my work. I can do lots of things that are wrong because it doesn't dictate how I behave. And the cool thing about music is, at least in classical music, is there's lots of codification of behavior. And we don't codify behavior in the software business. We can only codify process and policy. So this here is a picture of codified behavior in music. And it might be a little hard to see, but you know what music notes are. You've probably seen those if you're not a musician. But up here we have all these little symbols that indicate how we behave. Move the bow a tiny bit, hit it hard, hit it soft, do it in a certain way, and there's like little keys in all of music. So when you're up there seeing those orchestras perform, they're actually doing some really technical work reading all of this stuff as they go. So we learned early on that we need to behave certain ways in order to get the outputs that we want. And so I needed, my behavior was I needed a daily practice regime. I needed to do certain things around technical practicing, and I needed to do certain things around emotional practicing. It's exactly the same with software. So if we're going to say we value something, we have to answer that with a behavior in order to be successful. I can't say I value transparency and then hover over you and grab the wheel every time you're making a decision and not trust you, all right? And so this is where a lot of organizations, especially Agile organizations, really fall down, is they preach trust, transparency, collaboration, but in reality, they're practicing a command and control type regime. And this is very corrosive to software development. But we can solve that by tracing our values down to the behaviors that we expect. Agile projects are sort of cool. They employ ceremonies rather than processes, and ceremonies are meant to address this problem of behaviors. So this is really a great step forward, but we're really still not there yet. Anybody work with Agile Teams day to day? You guys work with some Agile Teams? Sure. Very popular now. I appraise a ton of Agile organizations, and I would estimate roughly about 90% of them aren't actually Agile organizations. They have a daily stand-up maybe they have something they call a retrospective, maybe after every sprint, maybe not. I love it. I go to daily stand-ups, Well, I love the part where I go do an appraisal and I say I want to go to a daily stand-up and they say, oh, we're not having one today. right? So the behavior is really important. So we continue to build this mind map, right, this framework. So the next question Dad used to ask me is, well, you know, you have this vision, you say you want to be this, but what do you need to do this? Like, what resources do you need to do this? So it always reminds me of this client I work with in Hong Kong, the National Railway. And in the National Railway of Hong Kong, they don't have an office building. What they have is a series of metro stations, just like well, sort of like the subway here, but more like the metro in DC, where every stop is a building. And those are their offices, and they want to do an Agile transformation project with us. They want to start using Scrum, which is a very cool idea, but they don't want to co-locate anyone. They want to have people spread across all these buildings, and they don't want to spend any money on tools to help them communicate virtually in an Agile way. So they failed the resources test. So when my dad said, what do I need? I said, you want this, or do you need this, right? Well, which one of these do I need? Well, remember I chose the Yo-Yo Ma character, that's who I was. So if I were to trace my journey here, I'm tracing from that character down to this resource need here. And it's really the same in Agile Teams. So for me, I was a bass player, so I needed a good instrument, lesson plan, practice space, so I can increase my capability. I need certain things. Well, our teams need the same things. Got to have tools, either a Scrum board or a whiteboard or a moving board or a virtual board if you're going to adopt Scrum because you want to be transparent because you have a vision of collaboration. So our traceable matrix starts getting a little more complicated here, but we need these things. So if we were to look at this in a mind map, in order to be successful, we need the resources. What part do I play? So that's what he used to always say. What part do you want to play? Do you want to play in an orchestra bass section? Do you want to be a bass player in a jazz band? How do you want to be? And this is, again, my score of 15 different parts. But each line is a different part, and everybody plays their role like a professional sports team, right? It's another metaphor that helps you out if you're a Scrum team. Anybody have young kids that play soccer? Remember that? And do you ever watch them play when they were 6 years old? And what happens? I call it bunch ball, but it's the same idea. They're all chasing the ball down the field, right? Even the goalie's out there running around after that ball. This is how we write software. Everybody is just a chaotic mess. Everybody's out there trying to solve every problem, getting in everybody's way, stomping on everybody's code. We need to learn to play positions, and musicians have a perfect metaphor. Each line on here is a task played by a specific resource controlled by a process, right? And we need to do that. I'm not saying that we need to be rigid. I'm saying that people need to know their boundaries and know what their tasks are to be successful. And some kinds of software are a little more agile. We do a little more improvisation, but we still have our own parts. Maybe they aren't always written down. We're learning as we go, and that's okay too. So I'm going to play my assigned part with integrity. You hear a lot of people in Scrum talk about we don't have assigned roles. People just self-subscribe for the tasks. Kind of sort of doesn't work really well sometimes without everything else above it, without the vision and the roles and the transparency. Unless we have that, we have a mess. Agile is growing exponentially, right? Everybody agree? Okay. Anybody know any CEOs or CIOs that know what Agile is? Very few, right? If you do, you're lucky, but it's rare. So does that mean Agile is really growing exponentially, or is it growing horizontally? We're using the wrong word, right? And the reason we have chaotic mess on our Agile teams is because they're all focused on question number 4, and questions number 1, A, B, C, 2, and 3 haven't been answered. The values, the vision, those questions, the resources have not been addressed, and you've got thousands of Agile teams scrambling around trying to be successful without the support of upper management or the C-suite. Yes, Richard.
And you also have upper management looking at things the way they did in waterfall with project management and those kinds of diagrams and things.
I give another talk I call, right. So I do another talk I call Agile Resiliency, which is all about this subject, that Agile is changing. right? Agile is changing because of what, yeah, I did it last year, didn't I? Because of what Richard says, that the CEO says, I love what the kids are doing down there, but I need my Microsoft project work plan, I need my measurements, I need my CPI and SPI, I need percent complete, I need all this stuff. And their customers are saying that too. And this is especially true in the federal government sector, especially defense, where everybody wants to do Agile, but customers are still paying by phase, paying by deliverable, and everybody wants their traditional project management work products. It's because questions 1, 2, and 3 are unanswered, or at least not agreed to. We're seeing this all the time. So it degrades our Agile implementation because our teams are trying their best, but their managers are saying, well, I love the daily stand-up idea, but can't you just do it once a week? Yes, sir.
So what can any of us do to that?
Well, I think somebody said they were in change management, I think you said you were. When you say that, are you talking about like organizational change management? Yeah, so it's an OCM problem, right? So we need to get in front of the CEOs and CIOs and the directors and really help educate them on, it doesn't have to be this framework, but a framework like this that helps them understand what their role is in this so that our teams can be way more successful, right? But it's an OCM problem to solve. This problem will never, ever be solved by Scrum, by a tool, by the Agile Alliance or anything like that. Ken Schwaber, probably suffers from the same problem dealing with his customers. Even the most senior Agile evangelists in the world are suffering from this same issue, right? It's going to be solved when management decides to solve it. This is one that I love. So when it comes to learning, learning is everything. And we were talking earlier about this, learning, how we've stopped learning in the software business. We've stopped teaching ourselves new things. We've stopped learning with new tools. It used to be that people would learn new compilers and learn new tools and learn new languages at work. Nobody does that anymore. People get degrees, they get a little bit of training on exactly what it is they need for the company, and they do that for 20 years once they get settled in a job. And they lose their passion for learning. This is where musicians really have the edge. Being a musician is a lifelong learning experience. I still study music. I'm 54 years old. I still take music lessons. Sometimes I feel like my 12-year-old going in for a music lesson, but I still go every week. I was taking a lesson here in New York City this afternoon, as a matter of fact. But we do regular learning every week, every month. We do regular learning new things. We go out and we listen to world-class performances all the time. Do we do that in software? Anybody ever gone out and seen a great speaker or someone that's a luminary in the industry? I watched a Grace Hop. Who's that? Oh, tonight you are, yeah, and you get 1 PDU for it. I saw a Grace Hopper video the other day. Does anybody know who Grace Hopper was? Remember her? Any of our youngsters remember who Grace Hopper was? Grace Hopper, right, was probably had more impact on the software industry than Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all those other youngsters combined. She was an admiral in the US Navy. She led the team that invented COBOL. Which is still by a factor of 20 the largest programming language used in the world, by the way. Don't let Java people fool you. COBOL's still the most used programming language on the planet. I'm not saying that's good, I'm just saying it is. She also invented the term bug by removing a moth from a relay on the ENIAC computer back in 1954. And she was a wonderful speaker that gave great talks about this very subject, about learning and how we just don't learn anymore. We don't teach people. We don't strive to be better. We don't go out and listen to luminaries talk, and we need to do that more to be successful. Story. These I haven't been reading them, but as a member of a product team, I will adopt a rigorous training program that includes lessons, listening, and transcribing, increasing my capabilities. In my company, we give 8 weeks of training every year to every employee. 8 weeks. Yeah, 8 weeks. And it's more than pays for itself. We want to do more. And we're a small company, but I think, of course I own the company, so I think this, but I believe we have some of the smartest people, most highly educated people in our business. Yeah, you want to come work for us, right? Yeah. We also have unlimited vacation.
Yeah, but isn't for the, especially for young programmers, training has changed though, right? Because they don't even like the classic, 3-day classroom type of training anymore. But because there's still tons of, the whole mean stack or no sequence. There's tons of innovation, and a lot of kids that are picking, or kids or people that are picking that up. But it's just, the nature of training like that has changed a lot. They don't want to sit in a 3-day.
Well, I agree the traditional 3-day class is dead. In our classes, we like the most recent class we're doing, we call it Agile Game Day, and it's 100% games. They come in and we start playing games from the first minute they walk in. There's no sitting down, there's no PowerPoint, that's kind of the future. A couple of years ago, the Hackett Group, that's kind of an unfortunately named consulting firm, did a study. I think they're out of New York originally anyway. So they're a productivity consulting firm. And they did a study on the productivity difference between a trained engineer, software engineer, and someone who's kind of thrown in the fire, right, in the first 12 months. So any guesses what the difference was? 2 to 1, you think? 3 to 1? Yeah, 29 to 1. They were 29 times more productive than their counterpart who did the traditional thrown in the fire and learned on the job, which has become a rite of passage, by the way, in our businesses, and it's just dead wrong. And we can fix that, right? Because if David Lee Roth can figure that out, we can figure it out, right? And we need to. It's huge. So this guy I liked. Anybody know who this is? This guy said, write everything down that you learn. In other words, have a written record of every new thing you learn, because you'll never know. Now, you might think that this guy isn't important, that he's nobody, but he's played on this guy's records, and he's played on this guy's records, he's played on her records. I keep messing up my slides, sorry about that. He's played on all these records. Diana Ross, Lyle Lovett, country guy, Gil, I can't remember his name now. He's played on over 2,000 records. Dolly Parton, James Taylor, Carole King, that's some country guy, Oak Ridge Boys, other country guy, Diana Ross. He's like the world champion musician. He's played on 2,000 records. He has 2 PhDs in music, and we tend to look at a picture of a guy like this and say, who the heck is this guy? But he's full of wisdom, and he's one of my role models. His name is Leland Sklar, and he always talks about write down everything you play. Write it all down, because you may need it. Now, you ask an Agile team about writing stuff down, what do they tell you? The Agile Manifesto says we don't have to write anything down. It doesn't say that. It says we prioritize working code over comprehensive documentation. Guess what? So do I. I think that's great. I prefer working code over comprehensive documentation. However, that doesn't mean I don't think we should have comprehensive documentation. I prefer ice cream over green beans. Too, right? I prefer 4 pieces of pizza over sushi, but it's probably not a good idea, right? And the Agile Manifesto never intended to say don't write stuff down. It just says it really means be judicious about what you write down. So this guy says, hey, write everything down. You never know. He tells a story about how he goes into one of thousands of recording sessions with his big book of everything he's written down, and he always pulls something out and uses it. Gets him up to speed faster, quicker. If you ever question the need to write stuff down in software, bring in a maintenance programmer, ask him what he thinks about writing stuff down. Bring in a tester, ask her what she thinks about writing stuff down. They have a slightly different perspective than a young programmer who's never built anything larger than a web page. Okay. So this is one of my pet peeves with Agile organizations, and the really good ones are good at this. I'm going to record designs. Designs, what? Who does designs? I'm going to record designs and decisions with version control. Musicians, if you look back at like Johann Sebastian Bach's music, it's all version controlled. It's all dot version 1.1, 1.2. Mozart did the exact same thing. They've been doing this for years. For some reason, we can't get software teams to do this. So our framework is starting to get built. So we can take this into our company now and start saying, hey, we need to answer every one of these questions in sequence before we can be great. So I want to talk a little bit about collaboration, because there's this notion with teams that people just do whatever it is they need to do and they don't really work together and collaborate that closely. But musicians are really good at this. And I want you to look at this video for a second and take a look at their body motions as they go through this. You probably noticed that their bows and their hands worked in perfect unison throughout that entire sequence. And this is replicated over and over again for hours on great symphonies. You also have 13 different sections in an orchestra all doing that exact same thing, but playing on a different team. All right, so that's the violin team. It's actually the first violin team. There's a second violin team, a viola team, a cello team, a bass team, and there's all the woodwinds and brass and percussion. They're all doing exactly the same thing in unison together, but they're all on separate teams. And if you've ever worked in a large Scrum and Scrum of Scrums environment where you've got lots of Scrum teams working in synchrony, that's exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish. This is what a large program of many teams together looks like. Yeah, it's exactly what it's like. So as a member of a product team, I'm going to attend and engage in all the ceremonies, be prepared to always play my part so we can deliver a superior product. It's really important, and the great teams do that. So my favorite question of all, my father used to ask me this all the time. I would tell him about what great stuff I was working on, especially when I was a little bit older in my 20s. He'd say, "Oh, Dad, I'm playing at Birdland, I'm playing in this band, we're doing all this stuff." And he would say, "So what, who cares? Prove to me that you're doing a good job. You're only making $50 a night, so how could you be successful?" So musicians really have this nailed. Ticket sales, audience reaction, and repeat attendees. You know, in Agile Teams, we love to talk about how we get instant feedback every 2 weeks. Musicians get instant feedback. Not every 2 weeks, instant feedback. Applause, people getting up and leaving, people throwing tomatoes maybe, people not buying tickets, yes, buying tickets. If you've ever been to a Broadway show that wasn't that successful, you see the seats starting to get more and more empty, and pretty soon they close the show down. It's a brutal feedback system. The other thing that's sort of cool in music is as we're going through training, we have evaluation sessions of individuals meant to strip you of all of your identity and dignity and stop caring about it from an egotistical way and start caring about it from an artistic way. And in music school, I went to music school in Baltimore, we had something called juries. And if anybody is an art major or studied art in college, you may have seen this. They do it with art majors also, where your peers evaluate your work in public. So the art's even worse. People walk around with the class and a bunch of the professors, and they look at your piece, and they're like, "That is awful." And you learn to deal with this as part of your training. And in the professional music world, we have something called challenges, which means that if you and I are in the bass section, and you're sitting beside me, you may not know this, but the person who sits at the closest edge of the stage is the best one. And then and they're all good, but as they move down in capability, they get further and further away from the audience. Now, everyone wants to be near the edge of the stage because that means opportunities for solo engagements and getting to be known by the public and just generally being more visible. So you can challenge the people in the front to move up. So I can go to you and I can say, "I think I'm better than you." And what they do is they put you and I on the stage together, and then they sit the orchestra out in the hall, and we play, and then they vote. And we find out instantly whether I was right to call you out or whether I was just my own fantasy that I was a better player than you. Do we have anything like this in our business? Why not? Why don't we have any kind of motivation or any kind of system for people to move up and excel in an egalitarian way? right now our system of moving up is political. I like you, you did me a favor, I knew your father, you've been here a long time.
Musicians can play the same piece. Software developers usually work on, no one's going to be duplicating the work of someone else.
Yeah, I suppose so, but they're doing the same kind of work though, right? They're writing C code, for instance. So no note for note, they're not doing the same thing, but conceptually they're still working on the same type of work. So the capability can be roughly measured, right? We routinely, when I was a CIO, we used to measure developers' capabilities and stack rank them, even though they all worked on different things. So yeah, you're right about that, but I don't think it's as different as you think. So it's a brutal system, and we don't have anything like that. We don't have any way of determining if you're a good coder versus you're being a good coder. Yeah, but yeah, bugs are caused for a lot of different reasons. Hardly ever bad coding, right? 70% of bugs are traced back to customers giving you bad requirements. So yeah, it's a very rough indicator. And I'm very reluctant to measure performance based on how many mistakes somebody makes. So it's kind of a demoralizing method, but people do it. Companies do it. They measure, NASA still measures software lines of code per hour as a metric to determine, the productivity of a person. How that works in a language like Java or C#, I don't understand.
I was like a story about the Apple programmer who reduced his code by 2,000% in 1 week.
Yeah.
And made it run a hell of a lot faster and a lot less space.
Yeah.
And put that on his performance review, and they just stopped doing it.
Yeah, the only problem with that story that I have is that his code wasn't maintainable. One of the things I learned, and this is a lesson you learn in music. When I was a young player, I played in the Baltimore Symphony in the old days. And I was in my early 20s, so I really didn't understand the concept of collaboration and doing things for the greater good as much as I do now in my 50s. And I used to play, and so people used to say, "Oh, you're too loud. You're showing off too much. You're being too extravagant, whatever." And it turns out there's an art to playing with a group, right? There's an art to being what they call a section player, and it's the same in software, right? So we need to think about sort of the total cost of ownership and the total effort involved in writing software, and realize it isn't just the code, because somebody has to maintain it, right? Somebody has to test it. If I've got a lot of inline code in a C program, it's really hard to maintain, right? So that was a neat story, I thought, but it was the reason they didn't continue it is because his code wasn't maintainable. It's a great story, though. Yeah. When I was a young programmer, I used to do inline assembler in C programming for the same reason, and I got the heck beat out of me for that.
In some sense, it's all about probably not the way metrics with it, peer review.
Yeah.
That's where your peers look at your code.
Yeah, code reviews, yeah, is a good way, yeah. That's more like the so what, who cares question, right? The only problem is it's hard to do a good code review. It's hard to get, people, there's a lot of emotion in code reviews, and this I was joking before when I said this, but when we did these juries in music school, it was really to strip out our pride, right, to get rid of it. And we did them every week, so by the end of the year, it was like nobody cared anymore, people would say, that song stinks. I'd say, well, why? And then they'd say, because your transition here didn't work good. And that was actually helpful to me, right? We don't do that so much in code reviews, right? There's a lot of emotion in it. I think we need to be better at it. The other thing is, how do I inspect and adapt? So I combine 9, 10, and actually 9, 10, and 11, typo, sorry. How do we inspect and adapt? And we do that through feedback, which code reviews is good feedback for us. We provide information, and then we adapt using that information. So one of the things we don't do really well in software development is get feedback about our behavior, right? We do some code reviews. We don't do a lot of process evaluation or behavioral evaluation. When I do appraisals, people say, oh, here's, people get very wrapped up in proving what they did. And they say, oh, here's proof that we, did a code review. And it's a code review form that somebody filled out. I say, well, how was that proof of how you behaved? How was that proof that you did something better that made the code better, and it really isn't. So we need to do a better job at getting feedback about the behaviors, providing information to our conductors, to our leaders, and then adapting on that information. So let's talk about behavior adaptation for a second. And I'm getting close to, I got the signal, so I'm getting close to the end. We think about process as a way to behave, and our companies put together process maps and process drawings and process descriptions that we're all supposed to follow, and people kind of follow them either not at all or mindlessly, whether it helps them or not. And when we develop a process for a company, we always hear back right away that it isn't fitting because my project's too big, too small, too agile, too large, too complicated, too not complicated. Whatever the reason is, the process doesn't fit for them. And companies need to learn how to adapt their behavior and adapt the processes that they use. So I think about things like process, like a code review, as a volume knob. In some scenarios, we want that volume knob to be on 11, right? Let's say we're building a targeting system for a cruise missile. We want that volume knob to be pretty high on the code review side, right? We want that thing to go to the right place, hit the right target. On the other hand, if I'm building a site to replace the New York Spin website, I probably don't need that code review on 11, right? I probably need it on 2, just to make sure it's not going to blow up, right? But we don't see that. We see people have a code review process or an estimation process or a planning process or a configuration management process or whatever it is that they've implemented, and it's always on 10, no matter what, with no modification, always on 11. So behavior needs to be attenuated based on goals and objectives. So if you think back to our 12 questions, going back to question 1, it needs to be attenuated to the answers to those questions. So what's our vision? What are the resources we're using? Who's doing what and playing which part? How well trained are our people? All of those things play into how much rigor each one of these slides is set to when we're doing our work. So to illustrate this, I've got a short video in a musical context of how important setting these volume knobs can be.
It's dramatic, we're not going to make it. We'll never see the light again, but I will keep on going till the end. Our ship has faced a hurricane, but I will keep on going. Our soul will sing, and I will keep on going
The process is there to help you, and the customer doesn't know any better. So in my job, I relate to this guy more than anybody else. Now, hopefully most coders are better than she was a singer, but that is not always the case. We have industries, by the way, that the coding is horrible. Federal government is one place where the coding is not high quality. We have other industries like that. We have companies like Thoughtworks that are well known to be really good at what they did, so they don't need to have that kind of rigor. So here our framework is getting built, right? We've answered all these questions and we've learned how to adapt our behavior to get the best possible results. Now my video was a little bit sarcastic. Hopefully it's not going to be that much of an intense result, but we want to give our coders every possible tool and every possible bit of help we can give them to make them successful, and that's what that engineer is all about. So how do we improve? These guys are a little too busy to improve. So musicians really are good at this. We have retrospectives every day. When we play with an orchestra, we have someone whose job it is to help us improve. He's known as the conductor in orchestra, but he's a lot like a Scrum Master. He's not a project manager. He's a person who's there to rehearse us and help us improve and offer us assistance. We get off, we together and in groups and work. Every section of an orchestral rehearsal involves group play and sectional play, where you separate off and you do things separately and pull it together. We have sort of a person whose job it is to help us improve. And we use audio recordings and video recordings a lot. And is anybody familiar with the concept of retrospective in an Agile project? The idea of a retrospective is to do what? To learn about what we did right and what we did wrong. So this is what a typical retrospective in an Agile team looks like. Well, guys, how did it go? Pretty good. Well, what went wrong? Thought we were pretty good. Well, what went right? We were pretty good. All right, well, I guess that's it, guys. Thanks. Retrospective over. Hardly any. That's also the same kind of attitude in a daily stand-up, by the way, but that's a different issue. We need to have structured retrospectives. We need to have people actively participate in the retrospective, analyze the performance, and capture feedback. We need to do this in a few different ways. We need to hold our regular retrospectives. We need to have peer reviews. And we need to do release reviews. So there are three different things. What went well, what went bad, and what we could do better. Is the product validating the product? Is the product meeting the intended use? And is the product ready to be released to the customer? We need to do all three of these in a structured way. And the good teams do. All right. So you can blow out the mind map now, right? So in order to have a successful team, you have to answer the questions. And I've blown out basically all the different answers for who we are, how we're going to behave, what we need, how we play, how are we going to learn, how do we manage data, how do we collaborate, so what, who cares, feedback, information, and how do we get better, with examples for each one. If you're ever doing a software process improvement project at your company, you're ever trying to adopt a methodology to improve the quality of software, this is the place to start. This is unrelated to things like Scrum, XP, Kanban, techniques like pair programming, sprint planning, and so forth. They're just leaves on the tree here. We need to answer these questions before we can bring in any tools, any processes, any procedures in order to be successful. So the really cool thing, and they always talk about this in music school, is you want to be so capable at what you do that you don't think about what you do. So the really great solo artists are so good at what they do. They're not looking at their instruments. They're worrying about other things. They're worrying about the quality of their sound and the way they deliver and the messaging and the way they interact with their audience. And in software, it's the same way. Discussions about Java and C are besides the point. Those are like price of admission. And I hear these, and this has been going on forever, but people just sitting around talking about the latest techniques in a programming language really aren't all that relevant. What's relevant is how do we make our customers super happy and delight them every day? That's what's really good. And until we get really good at code, we can't do that. The message I like to deliver to software organizations when I talk to them is the code isn't really what's relevant, right? It's everything else. It's the culture, it's the vision, it's the way we interact with our customers and collaborate together, it's the way we team together, it's the way we have our roles defined, it's the way we operate as a business from a strategic standpoint, not whether we write good code or not, right? So the cool thing with music is once you get to the point that you've really increased your capability and you're really just so far beyond the basics, you can do some really cool things with it. Does anybody remember the Harlem Globetrotters? Oh, this is New York. Of course you guys remember the Harlem Globetrotters. They're still around. But when I was a kid, they were the biggest deal, right? They're the greatest ball players in the world. I mean, you don't get to be able to do all that stuff without first mastering the game, right, and being really good at it. And music's exactly the same way. So we want to build capability, master our game, be so good at what we do that we can then take it to a level yet unheard of. And that's what these musicians. So this is a group of women. They're all professors that happen from Germany about what you can do with super great capabilities. And they kind of remind me of the Harlem Globetrotters a little bit. So I'm going to play you a quick video about that. Yeah, they're a really neat group, and they go around the world doing these kinds of performances and talking about what it takes to be great at music. So kind of really interesting. So anyway, that's the end of my talk. Just a couple of things to share with you before I take questions. If you feel like texting this number, you can get a copy of this presentation and some other kinds of things. But the other really cool thing is coming up in May, it's the Capability Counts Conference, which is a conference about software and increasing the capability of software developers. It's going to be it used to be called the SCPG conference, the CMI Institute's conference. But if you use the code New York Spin member, you get $400 off the conference until March 11th. So if you text this, you'll get information on this as well. And we're sponsoring this $400 discount for Spin members. So feel free. We'd love to have you there. If you'd like to speak there, actually, they are looking for people to speak right now. So if you go to their website, you can send in an abstract for speaking. And I'm vetting the speakers, so you know the guy doing it.